Hey guys, tonight we step into a world wrapped in frost and built of stone. You're standing at the base of a medieval castle, its gray walls towering, its turrets slicing into a sky already fading into dusk. You imagine roaring fireplaces, fur-lined robes, and some romantic, medieval soundtrack echoing through the halls. That fantasy lasts about 8 seconds, because when you actually walk through the gate, the cold hits you like a wall. Not grab a blanket cold. No, this is see your breath indoors cold. This is cold that lingers, bites, and seeps into your skin like it belongs there. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your first few steps across the stone floor of the castle's entrance hall, and your boots echo with a hollow, chilly thud. There's no carpet here, just ancient rock beneath your feet, colder than anything you've touched today. The stone doesn't feel like flooring. It feels like the earth itself hasn't moved in centuries. You reach out to touch the wall, part curiosity, part instinct, and instantly regret it. It's like pressing your hand to an ice block that hums faintly with silence. The kind of cold that doesn't just sit on the surface, but reaches back into some long-forgotten winter. Historians still argue whether castle architects intentionally made things this brutally inhospitable, or whether it was simply the best material they had at the time. Stone was great for defense. It didn't burn. It didn't collapse easily. It repelled arrows and battering rams and angry neighbors with pitchforks. But warmth? Not its thing. You walk further and the ceiling yawns above you, 20, maybe 30 feet up. There are no cozy wooden rafters here, no insulation, just more stone. The place feels more like a vault than a home. And the air? It's not just still, it's heavy, like the building itself is holding its breath. You pass a slit of a window, barely the width of your hand. It lets in a sliver of moonlight and wind. A faint whistling creeps through the crack, whispering secrets from the outside. There's no glass. There was no glass. The medieval solution to winter drafts was, essentially, brace yourself. You notice a tattered tapestry hanging on one wall, its threads thick with age. It's the only thing that looks vaguely soft. Rich lords sometimes used these as insulation. Not for art, not for beauty, but because they cut the wind better than bare stone. If you were lucky, you might get two on a wall. If you weren't, you got a stiff breeze and a draft down the back of your neck. You duck into a side corridor. The air there is colder. It's narrower, darker, and you realize quickly, this castle wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed to keep enemies out. You're the soft modern interloper who forgot to pack 6 layers of wool. And if you're wondering about central heating, don't. That's a few centuries off. There are no radiators, no vents, no hot water lines winding quietly through the walls. There's only stone. And stone, like an old grudge, doesn't let go of the cold easily. You rub your arms and press forward. It's nighttime now. You're starting to wonder how anyone in history managed to sleep in one of these things without turning into a medieval popsicle. Because the longer you stand here, the more it becomes clear. You don't beat the cold. You just try to outlast it. Your breath fogs. The air carries the faint scent of ash, damp wool, and something ancient. You wrap your cloak tighter. Wait, you didn't bring a cloak? Bold choice. Behind a heavy wooden door, you find a chamber, maybe a noble's. There's a bed with tall posts draped in thick curtains. We'll talk about that later. Believe me, it matters. But for now, all you feel is the contrast. This little bubble of fabric stands as your first glimpse of how people carved out warmth from nothing. You sit. The mattress is stuffed with straw. It crinkles. You shift. Something pokes you. You wonder if there are mice. You don't want to know. A guard passes outside the door. His boots scuff along the flagstones. No fire, no lantern, just the distant sound of footsteps wrapped in stone. You're beginning to feel what people felt every night for centuries. The dark isn't scary. The cold is. And this is just the beginning. The first thing you learn is this. Castles are not built for warmth. They're not even built for people, really. They're fortresses, stone trophies of power meant to survive siege warfare, not sleepy time. And you? You're currently wandering the interior, like someone who accidentally booked a night in a dungeon on Airbnb. You shuffle down a corridor that's about as welcoming as a mine shaft. The walls are sweating somehow. Tiny droplets gather on the uneven stone, catching your breath in glistening little beads before sliding downward in slow motion. Every step echoes like you're inside a cathedral, only colder, always colder. You start to notice something strange. It's not just the material of the castle that works against you. It's the layout. Everything about the place channels cold air like it's trying to win a refrigeration contest. Spiral staircases act like wind tunnels. Tower halls funnel icy drafts from rooftop to floor. Even the narrow windows don't help. They're cut to shoot arrows, not let in sunlight. It's like the castle is actively trying to remind you that comfort is for the weak. Historians still argue whether this drafty design was a tragic oversight or an intentional tactic for smoke dispersal. Either way, the result's the same. There's no such thing as a cozy corner. And remember, castles didn't have just one room to keep warm. They were sprawling complexes, chambers, great halls, kitchens, chapels, storerooms. Every added hallway was another crack for wind to slip through. You'd think more rooms meant more chances for warmth. Wrong. It meant more surfaces for the cold to crawl across. Pause at an arched opening to the great hall. It's massive. The kind of space you'd expect for a royal feast. Long tables, banners, maybe a wild boar on a spit. But right now, it just feels like a freezer. The ceiling stretches high above like the inside of a church. It's majestic, yes, but heat rises, and up there, it dies alone. You notice a hearth at the far end. Big one. Probably where they lit fires for events or gatherings. But it's dark now. Just blackened stones and faint soot on the floor. You imagine it lit, crackling with energy. But the moment the fire dies, the heat flees like a guilty servant. The stone absorbs it all. You could set a torch in the middle of the room and still see your breath on the opposite wall. The walls themselves don't help. Castles boasted walls up to 10 feet thick. That's great for resisting siege engines, terrible for holding warmth. The stone doesn't radiate heat. It radiates yesterday's frost, and it holds onto that cold like a grudge passed down for generations. You make your way toward a narrow hallway leading to the living quarters, or what passed for them. The noble family usually slept upstairs, in the towers, perched above the earth like frozen birds. These rooms were small, often rectangular, with 1 or 2 windows if you were lucky. No glass, just wooden shutters and wishful thinking. One scholar once called castles stone thermos flasks for the cold, and it's kind of true. Once the stone cooled down, say, in early November, it stayed that way until April. You weren't heating a room. You were trying to warm the memory of summer. You poke your head into a side chamber, a narrow bed, a wooden chest, and an old tapestry attempting to act like a wall. There's a fireplace, empty, black, cold. The chimney, if there is one, is likely clogged with smoke from a century ago. There's a reason the wealthiest castles later started building fireplaces with narrow, tall chimneys that actually directed smoke upward and out. But in earlier times, nope. Fire just floated around the room like an annoying ghost, getting into your eyes and lungs. Medieval architects were brilliant at designing defensive walls. Ventilation? Not their strong suit. The cold isn't just in the air. It's in the stone, in the floors, in the walls, in your bones. You rub your hands together and blow into your palms. It helps for maybe 5 seconds. You think about opening one of the wooden shutters. But why? To let in the howling wind from outside? No thanks. You're better off curling up in the darkest, most airtight corner you can find, which is probably still only 20% windproof. And the kicker? You're not even in the dead of winter yet. This is autumn chill, the kind that makes you feel mildly alive. Come February, the temperature inside a castle could match the frost level outside. You could wake up with ice on your blanket. Some people did. You move toward a thick wooden door, iron-braced and warped with age. Beyond it lies another stairwell, curling upward into the black. You think of noble lords marching up these steps in fur-lined cloaks, thinking themselves masters of the realm. Jokes on them. The cold didn't care how many titles you had. If you didn't have fire and insulation, you froze just the same. It's a humbling thought. The mighty slept in these towers, but so did the wind, and the wind always got the last laugh. You press your hand against the door, and it creaks open just enough to let another gust slip through. This draft carries a faint scent, ash, damp linen, and something like boiled mutton. Not exactly a luxury spa, but it's all part of the experience. You're starting to realize something. Warmth wasn't a right in a castle. It was a battle, one you fought with every candle stub, every stone bedpan, every inch of curtain or cloak you could scrounge. And tonight, you've just entered the battlefield. You turn a corner into what looks like a private chamber, one of the more refined ones, judging by the presence of a stone hearth in the wall. The word hearth sounds comforting, doesn't it? Brings to mind cozy cottages, gently crackling fires, maybe a warm cup of spiced cider. You'd like that. But what you've got here is, well, medieval reality. This hearth isn't cozy. It's a gaping mouth of soot and smoke, with a blackened iron pot hanging awkwardly inside like it's forgotten its purpose. There's no chimney, not in the way you're used to. Before the 12th century, smoke simply went wherever it wanted. Some floated up and out through a hole in the roof. Some didn't. Some just stayed, mingling with your lungs while you slept. Yum. Historians still argue whether early fireplaces were an intentional luxury or just a desperate workaround. Either way, what they weren't was efficient. These open fires leaked warmth faster than they produced it. The moment the flame dimmed, the stone sucked the heat right out of the room. It's like trying to warm a meat locker with a scented candle. You kneel and touch the hearth's edge. Cold. Of course it is. The kind of cold that feels like it's been waiting for centuries. And it has. This is the only source of heat in the room, if you had firewood, that is. And even if you did, you'd be playing a constant game of fire-tending roulette. You think about lighting a fire. You imagine striking a spark, watching the dry wood catch and burn into a flickering, hopeful glow. You settle in near it, drawing warmth slowly into your limbs. But then you remember, this isn't your house. It's not even your century. That fire brings smoke, and smoke brings coughing. And if you're lucky, a mild headache. If you're unlucky, unconsciousness. Carbon monoxide doesn't discriminate. Servants would have known this well. They lit fires at sunset, tended them through the night, and in many cases, slept beside them. Not for pleasure, for survival. But many chambers didn't even have fireplaces. Instead, they relied on small fire pits in the center of the floor, or, if you were wealthier, a brazier. A brazier is basically a metal bowl filled with hot coals. That's it. Simple, portable, and yes, dangerous. You want a warm room? Sure. Just put a bowl of fire next to your bed and hope your mattress doesn't join the blaze. Historical records are full of castle fires started by tipped braziers, forgotten embers, or linen curtains catching flame while someone slept a little too soundly. But still, it was better than nothing. And when the cold was creeping through every wall and the wind howled like a banshee choir, you didn't think about fire safety manuals. You thought about not freezing to death. You find a brazier now in the corner. It's empty. Just ashes and the faint outline of last night's desperation. The metal has warped with age, like it's been fighting cold for centuries, and finally gave up. You imagine what it must have felt like. The faint glow of embers lighting the stone floor, casting shadows across the bed, warming only what it could reach. The warmth was never enough, but even a little, that could mean the difference between numbness and sleep. You sit cross-legged nearby and exhale into your cupped hands. Then you start to picture how you'd prep for the night if you were living here. First, you'd need coals, probably stolen from the main hall fire, if there was one burning. You'd scoop them carefully with tongs, carry them up the stairs with a thick leather mitt, and lower them into the brazier, like you were lowering a tiny son into a cradle. Then you'd light a few sticks of kindling, feed the flame slowly, patiently. You'd wait. You'd hope. Hope that the heat would radiate out, just far enough to let your bones unclench. You wouldn't undress. You might not even unlace your boots. Sleep wasn't about comfort. It was about containment. The kind where your limbs curl in tightly, where your nose peeks out from under wool only when necessary, where every part of you shivers just enough to stay alive. You glance up at the ceiling. No insulation, no soft planks or wooden beams, just bare stone and empty space. The smoke from your brazier would drift up, pooling in the rafters. If you were lucky, it might find a crack. If you weren't, it would slowly drop back down and kiss your lungs goodnight. Still, the brazier had its moments. There's something oddly comforting about the glow of hot coals, a warmth that isn't loud or dramatic, but stubborn, quietly persistent. like the fire is saying, I won't beat the cold, but I'll fight. And then there's the silence. Between the creaking of timbers and the moaning of wind, silence in a castle is rare. But when the fire burns just right, and the smoke behaves, and the stone around you warms just enough, it happens. A few minutes of stillness, a few heartbeats of peace. That's when you sleep. Or try to. Outside, the wind groans through a narrow window. The stone wall breathes cold like it's exhaling regret. And beside you, the ashes whisper the truth. No one ever really got warm. Not truly. They just borrowed heat from whatever they could find and hoped it lasted until morning. You wake, well, sort of. You weren't fully asleep. Not here. Not with that wind. It wasn't a dream that pulled you back to consciousness. It was a draft, sharp as a blade, slicing down from some invisible slit above your bed and dragging itself across your neck like a petty ghost with nothing better to do. You sit up, eyes adjusting to the dim, and suddenly, every movement becomes a negotiation. Do I really want to leave this semi-warm indent in the straw mattress? Or should I just let my toes freeze and hope for reincarnation with better insulation? Because here's the thing. In a medieval castle, wind finds you. Always. You feel it again now. A sneaky, sideways breeze that doesn't belong anywhere near indoors. And yet, here it is, hugging the curve of the tower wall, seeping between uneven stones, slipping under the threshold of that heavy wooden door. You start to realize that the castle isn't merely cold, it's leaking. Air from outside wriggles in like a worm through a crack, always looking for the warmest bodies to ruin. You try plugging the draft with some spare cloth. Doesn't help. The wall itself feels like it's breathing cold. And to be fair, it kind of is. Historians still argue whether drafts were just overlooked design flaws or deliberate architectural features for airflow or smoke control. What's certain is this: castles weren't sealed. They weren't meant to be. Gaps were common, between stones, under doors, even in ceiling joints. Air passed through the castle like it had a lease. And what happens when a 14th century wind meets a 14th century bedchamber? You get the kind of chill that makes your teeth consider going solo. You light a stub of a candle, just enough to glance around. You see the wooden beams overhead. Some of them are newish, replaced after past fires or collapses. But most are ancient, gnarled like the knuckles of an old man who's fought too many winters. And above that, just roof tiles and sky. No insulation, no padding. The wind simply dives through the gaps in the wood and plummets straight down, and don't even start on the floors. The average noble bedchamber floor was just stone. Maybe with a reed mat or a thin woolen rug if you were lucky. Most servants had none. And you can't exactly heat stone. It's not cooperative. In fact, it seems personally offended by the idea. Your toes confirm this. So what did people do? They layered. Then layered again. Then wrapped those layers in another layer and tied it down with rope or fur or both. They hung tapestries not to admire them, but to block the wind coming from inside the house. They shoved straw under doors. They nailed blankets across windows. They wore nightcaps, mittens, and sometimes even cloaks to bed. Yes, cloaks. You went to bed in what you wore outside. You get up and take a few steps. Your breath follows you in a misty trail. You swear the walls are colder now than they were earlier. And maybe they are. Because once stone cools down at night, it becomes a kind of negative sun. It radiates cold. like a reverse fireplace that quietly hates you. You check the window shutter. It's closed, but barely holds. A finger-width gap at the edge howls softly, like someone trying to whistle through chattering teeth. You could try blocking it with a blanket, but you'd be stealing that from the bed, and you need every square inch of that wool tonight. You remember a detail from some dusty history book. Castle residents sometimes used rushes, bundles of dried reeds or hay, on the floor to keep their feet off the stone. In theory, they added warmth and absorbed moisture. In practice, they added bugs and smelled like last season. But hey, better than frostbite. Back at the bed, you pull the blanket tight again. No more rolling over. No more exploring. Just fetal position, knees to chest, arms tucked in. You don't sprawl in a medieval bed. You curl, like a lizard trying to trap its own body heat. There's no dignity in it. But there's no chill in your core either. So, win? Of course, nobles had better options. Allegedly. Their chambers were bigger, which sounds nice until you realize big rooms mean more air to lose and more cold to gain. In fact, castle architects often placed noble bedrooms high in the towers, far away from the ground's residual warmth, and squarely in the path of every stray gust the gods could muster. Some towers were so tall that the upper rooms froze before the lower ones even got chilly. If you were up there, wind speed became part of your bedtime routine. Meanwhile, downstairs, warmer, narrower, closer to the kitchen or inner walls. So, in a bizarre twist of thermal fate, the scullery maid sleeping beside a stack of turnips might have had a better night than the Baron's second son 3 stories up. You smile, just a little. Not at their suffering, but at the absurdity. The universe inverts itself here. High status, low warmth. A noble, wrapped in ermine, might be shivering more than the page boy curled up with a dog by the hearth. You lie still now, listening. Every wall groans. Every breeze feels personal. And yet, you're still here, still warmish. You've survived another draft. Barely. And in a medieval castle, barely is a victory. You're starting to notice a pattern here. It isn't just the cold air, or the hard stone, or the miserable lack of proper firewood. It's the way status and suffering get tangled together like thread in a worn-out tapestry. You'd expect the nobles, lords and ladies in their fur-trimmed robes to be living the warm life. Fireplaces roaring, feather beds fluffed, grapes dangling from golden platters. And yet, they were cold too. Sometimes colder than the people serving them. You climb the steps now, slowly. Each footfall echoes against the spiral stone staircase, and you can feel the temperature drop the higher you go. This isn't just your imagination. These upper chambers, those reserved for the ruling family, were often the most exposed rooms in the entire castle. Perched in towers, facing the wind, built for prestige more than practicality. Historians still debate whether nobles demanded these chilly rooms for visibility, safety, or ego. Likely a bit of all three. If you're going to rule a medieval world, you want a good view while doing it. Even if your toes are falling off, you reach the top and duck into a chamber. The walls are thicker here, but no warmer. There's a large bed in the corner. 4 posters, draped in heavy curtains. Fancy, right? Until you realize those curtains exist for survival, not decoration. This is where perception meets irony. The poor often slept lower down, in storerooms, kitchens, or servant halls, where the thick central walls held onto a little warmth. Some even slept in stables, curled up next to livestock for shared heat. Yes, cows were medieval space heaters. Don't knock it. Body heat is body heat. Meanwhile, in this upper room luxury suite, the lord of the manor was doing his best not to shatter from the inside out. His windows, big, arched, impressive, had no glass, just wooden shutters that creaked and moaned in the wind. Sometimes thin, oiled cloth covered the gaps, which, let's be honest, is about as effective as saran wrap in a blizzard. You take a step toward the window now and lift the latch. It creaks, the shutter swings open, and a gust of icy air slaps you like it's been waiting all day. Below you is the courtyard, covered in frost. Beyond that, the dark outline of the forest. Above, the stars blink like cold eyes. You shut the window immediately. Bold move. Terrible idea. The bed looks warmer. You cross to it and pull aside the curtain. Inside, it's a nest. Thick blankets, a fur throw, some linen sheets, maybe a straw-filled mattress raised on a wooden frame. But you notice something else. There's a stone at the foot of the bed, oval-shaped, smooth, still faintly warm. This is a bed warmer, a flat stone heated by fire and slipped beneath the covers before bedtime. Servants would heat them near the hearth, wrap them in cloth, and tuck them into the bedding. If you were lucky, you got one. If you were wealthy, maybe two. It wasn't plush warmth, it was survival heat, like charging your body with just enough life to make it through the night. And those servants? Let's talk about them. Because without them, this noble wasn't making it till morning. A team of nighttime attendants was often assigned to each chamber. Their job? Fight back the cold, quietly, constantly, and preferably without waking the Lord. They'd light the chamber hearth early, prepare the brazier, fluff the bedding, and warm the linens. Once their master was asleep, they stayed nearby, not to rest, but to listen, for creaks, coughs, or requests for more heat. You can picture it now. A young servant girl half dozing upright in a chair, a boy tending the brazier's coals, another watching the fire, eyes red with smoke. Their tools? Boiled wine, woolen wraps, and a near-magical sixth sense for when the room was getting dangerously cold. Downstairs, in contrast, the servants' own sleeping arrangements were, let's say, more rustic. They might curl up on straw, bundled in shared blankets, or sleep beside the kitchen's dying fire, pressed against each other like medieval penguins. It wasn't luxury, but it was lower, closer to the earth, closer to trapped daytime heat, and ironically, often more tolerable than the noble's icy perch upstairs. Of course, none of this was written down in bold letters. There's no medieval handbook titled "How Status Doesn't Keep You Warm." But if you read between the lines, if you look at where people actually chose to sleep when they had options, it's clear. Warmth didn't always follow gold. It followed common sense. You lie back on the mattress now. It's scratchy, and something pokes through the stuffing, but it's better than stone. The curtains around you do help. The air inside the bed is a few degrees warmer than the chamber itself, and that, tragically, is cause for celebration. And yet, you feel it in your bones. Status didn't matter. Not to the cold, not to the wind, not to the way breath curled like smoke from the mouth of a lord or a stable boy. Up here, in the fanciest room in the castle, there's no victory, just temporary warmth, and a lot of frost waiting to reclaim it. Section 6. You blink awake. Again. Not because the draft returned, not because the wind is rattling the shutters, but because something warm, blessedly warm, touched your ankle for a fleeting second. You jolt slightly until you realize it's a bedstone still holding a ghost of its heat. And now you remember. Before this chamber quieted, someone had come in, silent as snow, and slid heated stones beneath the bedding. A servant, your unthanked guardian of the night. In medieval castles, warmth was a collective effort. And you're the lucky one tonight, because somewhere out there, someone hauled those stones from the kitchen hearth, wrapped them in cloth, and delivered them like glowing treasures without waking you. This wasn't kindness. It was protocol. Upper-class comfort was built on the backs of those tasked with making it happen. And in winter, that meant servants with hot rocks. You picture it now. A pair of night servants preparing the room while you, let's pretend your nobility for tonight, eat your dinner downstairs. One carries the brazier, filled with smoldering coals, its metal glowing faintly red through centuries of soot. The other handles the bedstones, flat, river-smoothed rocks placed by the fire earlier, carefully turned to avoid cracking from uneven heat. They move quietly, methodically. First, the hearth is stoked, then the brazier is positioned, far enough to not ignite anything, close enough to radiate a mild heat bubble. Then they slide the bedstones between layers of linen. The goal isn't to roast you, it's to keep your toes from going black. Historians still debate whether the use of bedstones originated from Roman heating traditions or emerged independently across Europe. Either way, by the Middle Ages, it was a practiced ritual. Heat the stone, wrap it, place it, repeat. And sometimes, instead of stones, they'd fill metal or ceramic warming bottles with boiling water, wrap them in wool, and slip them beneath the sheets. A kind of pre-electric hot water bottle, and just as precious, but dangerous too. Ceramic cracked, metal leaked. The only thing worse than freezing was waking up soaked in lukewarm water on a sub-zero night. Still, it was worth the risk, because medieval nights were long, and cold doesn't sleep. You roll over, now more curious than tired. Your hand grazes another wrapped stone at the edge of the bed. It's faintly warm, like the last memory of a fire. And suddenly, you feel the human effort behind it. Someone chose this stone. Someone wrapped it. Someone placed it gently while you were gone. That's not just heating. That's a medieval act of care. You think of the servant now, probably still awake, tucked into a corner on a stool waiting. Their job doesn't end when you fall asleep. In many ways, that's when it begins. They tend the brazier. They listen for your cough. They watch for smoke buildup. They prepare extra blankets if you stir. You sit up and glance toward the doorway. It's closed, but not locked. A signal that the servant may return at any hour. And they will, if needed. Because if the brazier dies, if the wind kicks up, if your fever spikes, someone will come. You wonder, briefly, who warmed the servant. Downstairs, servants sleep in corners, on straw, in stairwells. If they're lucky, they're allowed to curl near the kitchen hearth. If not, they bundle in cloaks and press close to each other, trading personal space for shared heat. It's a quiet, unspoken truth. Comfort for one meant labor from three. But their tricks were clever. They used sheepskin wraps, layered wool socks, and sometimes even heated bricks, smaller and more portable than stones. They hung their cloaks by the fire, hoping to trap warmth in the fabric for later. Some even sat on warming stools, wooden frames lined with iron trays filled with embers. Imagine trying to pray on a bench filled with burning coals under your rear and still keeping a straight face. Of course, not every servant was so well equipped. Many simply endured or improvised. You can imagine a few sneaking sips of boiled wine meant for the master, or sharing a brazier among themselves before returning it upstairs. Cold made everyone practical, and occasionally sneaky. And what about you now? You're tucked beneath 3 layers of fabric, your foot cradled by the fading warmth of a bedstone. For a moment, the room feels bearable, not comfortable, never that, but survivable. You breathe slowly, eyes tracing the outline of the bed's curtain frame. The fire flickers dimly in the hearth. The brazier puffs a tiny breath of heat, and the stone beneath you still whispers the memory of hands that held it. Hands that have already moved on to another chamber, another room, another bed. Somewhere, another noble is easing into sleep, never quite realizing just how much warmth is borrowed, never owned. It's strange to think that in a castle built of conquest, the smallest acts of warmth were the quietest victories. And tonight, you've been gifted one. You pull the curtains tight around your bed, and for the first time tonight, you feel a sense of boundary, not comfort. Let's not get carried away, but a kind of shelter, a cocoon. You didn't realize how much the cold wasn't just physical until now. It's emotional too. It creeps into your thoughts, makes your breathing shallow, turns your bed into a battleground. And then, you close the drapes. Curtains weren't decoration. They were defense. The medieval 4-poster bed wasn't invented for luxury or romance. It was a survival chamber, a tent within a room where warmth could be hoarded and body heat preserved. The heavy drapes weren't meant to flutter prettily in candlelight. They were supposed to seal in life. Inside your little chamber, things are different. The air is still cold, sure, but it's your cold. It's not drifting endlessly from a window slit or snaking in under the door. It's captured, muffled, slowed. You breathe. The curtain barely shifts. There's a strange calm to it, like you've closed yourself off from a hostile world, which, in this case, is, well, your bedroom. Historians still debate whether the curtain bed started with royalty or filtered up from monastic design. But once the idea caught on, it spread like wildfire, because nothing else worked quite as well. Wealthier families added layers to the system. First, the curtains, thick wool or velvet, sometimes lined with fur. Then, extra layers on the bed, felted wool blankets. Imagine trying to sleep under a horse saddle. Feather-stuffed bolsters, or, if you were really fancy, imported Flemish linens so stiff they could stand up on their own. The mattress was raised off the stone floor to avoid cold drafts, sometimes by more than a foot. And underneath, sometimes another insulating platform, wooden slats, straw, or even layers of leather stretched tight across a frame. You lie flat and notice how the bed creaks, not a comfy spring kind of creak, but the tired sigh of ancient wood that's held centuries of restless limbs. Your body presses into the straw-filled mattress, and it gives way reluctantly. No memory foam here, just compacted grass and the faint, lingering smell of something vaguely agricultural. But what's remarkable is how all of this, curtains, blankets, layers, works. Not well, but enough. You feel warmer than you did outside. You no longer hear the wind in full force. The chamber's groans and whispers are dulled. Even your breath feels slower, like your lungs are hibernating. You shift slightly. Something crinkles. Feathers? Straw? Mice? You hope not mice. But who could blame them? It's warm in here. This bed is the medieval equivalent of a heated studio apartment. Sure, there's no plumbing, or privacy, or silence. But it has one thing nobody else had: retained heat. And that was everything. Of course, you weren't always alone in here. Bed sharing was common, even expected. Families piled together. Parents, children, siblings, guests. Servants sometimes joined in, especially during brutal winters. It wasn't scandalous. It was strategic. One person's warmth was never enough. But 3 or 4 bodies? That might push the temperature from death risk to mild discomfort. You imagine curling up with 2 others right now, knees tucked, arms folded, all facing inwards like penguins. Everyone breathing through scarves. No talking, just synchronized shivering. The scent of boiled onions lingering faintly from dinner. Someone's cold feet finding your legs. It's a weird kind of intimacy. Less affection, more survival contract. And yes, noble families did it too. Even royalty. Because no title protected you from a frost that could settle in your lungs and stay there all season. You wrap yourself tighter, reaching for the edge of the blanket, which feels like it might have once been part of a tapestry. It's heavy, itchy, and barely wide enough, but it covers your shoulders. That's enough. That's a win. In the darkness, you press your hand to your chest and feel your body holding its own heat. A soft, flickering engine of life. And for the first time tonight, you get it. The bed isn't furniture. It's armor. Not against swords or arrows, but against the thing that killed just as surely. Cold. The kind of cold that slid through walls, crept into bones, and took people quietly in their sleep. So these beds, with their drapes and furs and squeaky straw mattresses, they weren't about rest. They were defensive structures, the final line of defense when stone walls couldn't help you. You exhale, the curtain brushing your nose. Your breath warms the small air pocket you've created. It's not luxury. It's not even comfort, but it's containment. And in a medieval castle, containment was survival. You wake to a sound you can't quite name. Maybe the sigh of the brazier as it dies, or the whisper of the wind pressing against the shutter, like a cat pawing to be let in. You've lost all sense of time. There are no clocks, no chimes, no warm sunlight to greet you. Just darkness and the heavy realization that the room feels colder now than when you fell asleep. It's hard to say whether you ever truly slept. In a medieval bed, wrapped in layers of wool, curtain-bound and straw-pillowed, rest was something you reached in increments, short bursts between shivers, quiet moments between noises, hope pressed into the folds of fabric. So now, as you lie there half-dreaming, your body instinctively curls tighter, trying to capture what little heat remains. You flex your toes. One foot touches something soft, a felted blanket. The other, just cold linen. You drag the warmer layer over, grateful for every inch. Welcome to the daily battlefield of medieval sleep. Wool, felt, and flattened geese. The material hierarchy of warmth in medieval times was brutally honest. Poorer folks had rough-spun wool blankets, often rewoven from old clothing or scrap cloth. Slightly better? Felted wool. Thick, matted layers that resisted wind and locked in heat. The truly lucky or rich had access to feather beds, sacks filled with goose or duck feathers, fluffy in theory, lumpy in practice. Think of it as a down comforter that's been beaten with a broom and left outside during a siege. You shift again. Beneath you, the mattress crunches. Not dramatically, but just enough to remind you that it's filled with straw, not springs. And you're glad, because straw is dry. Straw holds heat, and unlike feathers, it doesn't poke through the sheets and stab your ribs like a judgmental toothpick. Historians still argue whether feather beds were actually warmer or just more of a social flex. Sure, feathers trap air and provide cushion, but in a damp, drafty room with no fire, did they really help more than a woolen sack full of hay? Either way, the nobility believed in them, and that's often half the battle when you're cold and pretending you aren't. You rub your fingers together. They're stiff, slightly numb, but not painful. That's a win. You reach up to adjust your nightcap. Yes, you're wearing one now. Every medieval sleeper worth their frostbite wore some form of head covering to bed. Heat escapes through the scalp, and when your entire room is conspiring against your circulation, every strand of wool matters. Some people even wore fingerless mittens to sleep, or wrapped their hands in scraps of cloth. You picture yourself now, swaddled like a leftover pastry. It's not elegant, but it works. You wonder what nobles did in this situation, those with real money, real titles. And the answer is more layers, more furs, more servants, more absurd textiles imported from distant lands, silk linings, sable throws, wool from sheep whose names you'd probably have to pronounce in Latin. But even then, cold got in. Because layers weren't just about comfort. They were about psychological reassurance. You weren't actually warmer with 4 blankets than with 3, but it felt like you were. And in the deep reaches of a frozen February night, sometimes that placebo was enough to push you through to dawn. You roll to your side and feel something tug at your blanket. It's tucked into the side of the bed too tightly. You loosen it, and the cold rushes in like a waiting thief. One gust. That's all it takes. You pull it back, tuck it tight again, curse yourself for moving. You won't make that mistake twice. Everything in this room exists to trap heat. The curtains, the mattress height, the bed's location, ideally not beside a wall, since stone radiates cold like a medieval air conditioner. Some beds were even placed on raised wooden platforms, or had bed rugs draped over their frames to block floor drafts. People didn't just sleep. They engineered sleep zones like they were prepping for Arctic exploration. Even the pillows had their role. While often smaller and flatter than modern ones, they were sometimes filled with down or soft moss, wrapped in layers of linen and wool. Nobles might scent them with herbs, lavender, rosemary, sage, not for romance, but to mask the mildew and smoke and whatever the servants had burned that morning trying to warm the bedpan. You're starting to appreciate the genius of it all. This wasn't chaos. It was calculated. A system of survival rituals passed down through generations. Want to sleep through a medieval winter? You didn't need wealth. You needed technique. You needed to understand airflow, moisture, proximity to fire, fabric density, and human thermodynamics. Basically, you needed to be a cold-weather MacGyver. The brazier sputters faintly in the corner. Dim now, dying. But it gave you a few extra hours of peace. And honestly, that's all anyone could ask for. You exhale, nose pressed beneath the blanket, feeling the faint dampness of your own breath warming the small pocket of air around your face. It smells like wool and faint ash. Not ideal, but it's home for tonight. You're not alone in bed tonight. Well, you sort of are, but not in the medieval sense. Because in the 13th century, bed sharing wasn't just common, it was practically non-negotiable. The idea of having a bed all to yourself? That's a luxury of modern plumbing and personal space, my friend. Back then, warmth trumped privacy, and your fellow sleepers were your central heating. You shift slightly, drawing your knees toward your chest, and you can almost feel the phantom presence of 2, maybe 3 other people packed in beside you. Siblings, servants, children. In a world without insulation, bodies became blankets. This wasn't some quaint sleepover arrangement. It was strategy. People didn't stretch out. They curled up, forming tight bundles like medieval nesting dolls. Back to back, knee to shoulder, nose to the back of someone's neck. It was survival through shared temperature. You think of noble families, huddled in enormous beds with curtained sides, parents at the center, children tucked in at their feet like oversized hot water bottles. Even adults who weren't related might share a mattress, especially during travel or in cold conditions. And no, it wasn't considered improper. It was efficient. Historians still argue whether the beds were truly designed for so many sleepers, or whether necessity forced people to pack in tighter than the blueprint suggested. But either way, the reality is clear. If you wanted to make it through a freezing night, you didn't do it alone. And for servants, multiply that intimacy by 10. Servants shared cramped side rooms or even slept in the hallways, heads against walls, feet near embers, sometimes 4 or 5 people to a pallet. They'd sleep in shifts, rotating spots near the fireplace. The best location? Right beside the kitchen hearth, where the stone still remembered heat. The worst? Anywhere near an external wall, where the cold leaked in like a curse. There's a reason castle layouts often included inner chambers for sleeping. These weren't grand. They were humble, windowless, and jammed with people. But they were warm, or at least less catastrophically cold. You imagine it now? A cluster of bodies wrapped in cloaks, snoring softly, someone's elbow in your ribs, another's foot warming yours. You laugh a little, quietly, because it's oddly touching. There's something deeply human about it, the way people sacrificed space, dignity, even hygiene just to keep one another alive. It wasn't cozy, but it was community. And the rules? Unspoken, but ironclad. You didn't hog blankets. You didn't breathe directly onto someone's neck unless invited. You didn't wake people unless someone had rolled off the bed into a freezing puddle of rushes. And if someone farted under the covers, you just dealt with it. That's part of the social contract. You sit up slightly and press your hands to your face, imagining what it must have been like to wake up in the middle of the night and feel someone else's body, cold, but there, proof that you weren't facing the dark alone. Even in noble households, the idea of individualized space was rare. If a chamber was too large, it was split by curtains or partition walls. People made little microclimates inside these sleeping areas, bedding bundles piled with furs, people grouped by role or age. Think of it like medieval bunk beds, just without the structure, or the beds, or the personal shelf for your phone. And this closeness extended beyond the bedroom. Families worked together, ate together, lived in the same stone spaces, and so naturally, they slept in them too, Privacy was not a concept. Survival was. You remember reading that during particularly brutal winters, people even slept beside livestock, not in barns necessarily, but inside the castle, especially in storage or servant quarters where cows, goats, or pigs might be temporarily housed for warmth. A cow's body temperature is about 101.5 degrees Fahrenheit, more effective than any wool blanket, and quieter than some snorers. You lie back down, tucking the blanket tight around your neck, and it hits you. This isn't just about warmth, it's about trust. You had to trust the person beside you. Trust they wouldn't steal your blanket. Trust they wouldn't cough something contagious into your face. Trust they'd stay still and maybe, just maybe, offer a bit of body heat when your fingers went numb. And in return, you gave the same. You endured the smells, the snores, the dreams muttered into your ear. Because for all the grandeur of castles and nobility and heraldic banners, what kept people alive was sharing. Tonight, you're alone in this bed. But if you close your eyes and listen past the wind, you can almost hear them. The breathing of others, slow and steady, curled in layers, hearts ticking like tiny clocks, warmth in numbers. The fire is nearly out. You can tell without opening your eyes. There's a new stillness in the room, a colder kind of silence. The brazier that had been softly cracking and glowing for hours now radiates nothing but the faint smell of ash and iron. It's like sleeping beside a corpse of warmth. You peel your eyes open, just barely. The curtain around your bed has trapped some heat, but the change is undeniable. Your nose is cold. Your breath fogs. The air is thinner, brittle. And suddenly, you understand something medieval people knew deeply. A fire is not a guarantee. It's a gamble. You sit up, still wrapped in blankets, and peek through the curtain's edge. The embers in the brazier are glowing faintly, like tired eyes. No flame, just that quiet, dying red. You consider getting up. But then again, you consider frostbite. It's a toss-up. In the medieval world, fire was everything, and it was also dangerous. Comfort and catastrophe shared a flame. You remember now that this wasn't just a question of warmth. It was a game of risk. Braziers, hearths, open flames. Every heating source was a potential threat. A knock, a blanket too close, a spark carried by a breeze from a cracked window, and the entire chamber could go up in flames. Many did. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of braziers in sleeping quarters was born from convenience or desperation. Likely both. Chimneys didn't become common in domestic buildings until the late medieval period. Before that, smoke had to find its way out on its own. Or not. Many rooms were smoky, filled with hanging soot, eyes watering through the night. But for every eye rubbed red, there was a back warmed, at least temporarily. And it wasn't just the fire, it was the structure around it. A brazier sat low to the ground, often near bedding or fabric. One careless movement, one wool sock flopped too close, and that was that. You rub your arm. It's warm, but only just. You think of the stories. Noble families losing entire wings of their castles to a fire started by a single coal. Servants awoken by smoke, rushing to pour water, only to find the buckets frozen solid outside. And worse still, the silent killer. Carbon monoxide. You know what it is. You've heard the warnings. But imagine living with it before it had a name. Before detectors. Before science. People died in their sleep, never stirring. A brazier placed too close in a room too sealed. The fire didn't take them with heat, but with exhaustion. One deep breath too many. In fact, the very act of sealing a room to keep out cold increased the risk of smoke buildup. Doors bolted, windows shuttered, curtains drawn. Every step toward warmth was a step away from oxygen. You slide out of bed now, barefoot on the stone floor. An immediate regret. The cold punches through your heels. You tiptoe to the brazier and crouch, blowing softly onto the coals. A faint wisp of smoke curls upward, still alive, barely. You add a sliver of wood from the pile nearby, watching as it smolders and catches, curling into orange. A fragile flame, yes, but a start. This moment, this ritual of coaxing warmth from near death, was repeated nightly in castles across Europe. Fire tending wasn't just a task, it was an act of devotion. Parents passed the knowledge to children. Servants learned the balance of air, ash, and timing. It wasn't guesswork, it was survival craft. And it wasn't just night. Throughout the day, fires had to be managed constantly. Kitchens kept theirs burning year-round, guard rooms too. Embers were stolen from one chamber to restart another. Coals were carried across courtyards, wrapped in moss or tucked in iron boxes. Because fire wasn't plentiful, it was nurtured. You stand again, shaking your legs out from the cold bite of the floor. You pull your cloak tighter, and you think, fire was never just about heat. It was about hope. Hope that the logs would last, that the brazier wouldn't fall, that the smoke would find the right path up and out, that the room would warm just enough for just long enough, that no spark would wander. You glance back at your bed. It looks inviting, but you hesitate, because now you understand the medieval paradox. The same fire that kept you alive could also kill you quietly. And you had to live with that every night, knowing that the warmth you cherished might come at a price you wouldn't wake up to regret. But you return anyway. Pull the curtain, slide back under the blanket. Let the cold air chase your limbs for a few seconds before they tuck into your core again. Because fire, for all its dangers, was the best chance you had. And tonight, like those who lived and slept centuries before you, you bet on the glow. The room is quiet again. Too quiet. You're lying still, eyes closed, trying to fall back into sleep. But something's shifted. It's not the usual draft or cold stone sigh. It's deeper, thicker. The air feels heavy, but not in the comforting way of piled blankets or sleepy breath. It's smoke. Not much, not choking, just enough to dry your throat and sting your eyes the moment you open them. And that's when the reality hits you. This wasn't rare. This was a regular part of sleeping medieval life. While we like to imagine a castle's hearth as the warm, beating heart of the home, it was often the sneaky, wheezing lung. The braziers, fire pits, and smoke holes all played their part, but rarely performed perfectly. Instead of cozy warmth, rooms often ended up thick with fumes, especially on still winter nights when wind refused to carry the smoke away. You sit up, slowly. The curtain around your bed helps keep out drafts, but it also traps smoke. There's a reason historical accounts mention people sleeping with their heads under the covers in winter, not to stay warm, but to escape the irritating sting of indoor smoke. Historians still debate whether the open hearths and smoke-blackened ceilings were tolerated or simply endured. Some suggest it was preferable to freezing. Others argue it shortened lifespans. And in truth, both are probably right. Before chimneys became common, post-12th century, Smoke simply floated up and tried its luck. It might escape through slits in the wall, cracks near the ceiling, or a rudimentary louvre in the roof. Or more likely, it lingered, ghost-like, acrid, and persistent. You push aside the curtain and step out of bed. The room is gray with shadow and haze. No fire blazes now, just the faint red glow of the brazier and the lazy spiral of smoke snaking up from its core. You blink, your eyes water, and you can't help but marvel that this was normal. You move toward the door. It creaks, reluctant to open. Outside, the corridor's marginally clearer, but only because the draft through the hallway creates an airflow that whisks the worst of the smoke away, right into another room. There are tales, hundreds, probably thousands of deaths from this silent threat. People who never woke, who fell asleep in warmth and didn't realize the fire had taken more than just the cold. Carbon monoxide poisoning, of course, but they didn't have a name for it back then. Just, he didn't wake up. And while the nobility had more spacious rooms and sometimes higher ceilings, it didn't help much. The smoke still gathered. In fact, the more enclosed the chamber, especially with curtains drawn and windows shuttered, the more concentrated the danger. You peer into a servant's room down the corridor. It's simpler. Bare floor, a mat of woven rushes, and a single iron brazier near the wall. A boy is curled up beside it, motionless. For a moment, your breath catches. Then he stirs, turns, coughs. A small, reassuring tragedy. He's still alive, but his lungs are already carrying the legacy of centuries of this nightly ritual. You walk back to your own chamber. The candle has gone out. The brazier's glow has dimmed, but not died. And the smoke has lessened, now that the air's had time to move. You pick up the poker and nudge the coals. A few sparks rise and fade. No fire tonight, just enough to warm the idea of warmth. You return to the bed, slide beneath the blankets again. But this time, you keep the curtain partially open. You understand now. Sealing yourself in may trap heat, but it also traps what the fire leaves behind. Some nobles tried to fight this with tapestries soaked in vinegar, thought to purify the air. Others burned herbs, rosemary, thyme, juniper, hoping the fragrance would mask the damage. But these were distractions, pretty smokescreens. The real battle was never won. It was simply survived. You think of the paradox again. In a castle of cold, your greatest ally, fire, was also your most unpredictable threat. Like a mercurial friend, comforting one night, cruel the next. The air in the room feels a little cleaner now. Still cold. Always cold. But breathable, and as you close your eyes, you wonder how many people over the centuries lay in this same uneasy silence, listening to the faint hiss of coals, the slow creep of smoke, and the sound of their own breath, hoping everything they had, that it would still be there come morning. You're deep in the bed now, curtains drawn, limbs tucked, breath curling soft trails against the wool, and for a fleeting moment, you feel like royalty. Or rather, you feel like you've survived as royalty. Because tonight, this room, this pile of linen and straw and warmth, it feels almost like a win. Until you remember, the higher you sleep, the colder you get. That's the unspoken curse of medieval castle life. Nobles had better furniture, finer fabric, and private chambers, yet they were often stuck upstairs, in tower rooms built more for prestige than practicality. And that meant altitude. That meant exposure. That meant cold. You sit up slowly, your joints stiff from the chill that somehow made its way past every blanket and curtain. You shuffle across the stone floor and peek through the shutter. Below, the lower levels of the castle sit in thick darkness. Shadowed, yes, but warmer. Or, more accurately, less freezing. Why were the noble bedrooms placed so high? Historians still debate whether this was for defense, symbolic power, or architectural tradition. Towers meant status. The higher the room, the closer to heaven, the farther from commoners. But practically, it meant farther from the Earth's thermal core, from the bakery ovens, from the densely packed servant quarters radiating shared heat. And the walls? Still stone, thick as punishment, still conducting every gust of wind directly into your spine. Worse yet, those elegant arched windows, designed to impress visitors and let in light, did little to help and a lot to hurt. Most had no glass. At best, they were fitted with oiled parchment or horn panels, which blocked wind as well as a bedsheet would stop a landslide. You push the shutter gently, and a sliver of icy air slices in. Instantly, your hands are stiff again. You close it, fast. Meanwhile, downstairs, that's where the clever ones slept. You descend quietly, barefoot, careful not to echo. The spiral staircase still acts like a wind tunnel, pulling cold from every crevice, funneling it down like a polite avalanche. But as you pass the mid-levels, near the kitchens, storerooms, and inner walls, you feel it. Retained warmth. It's subtle. No fire is lit here. No braziers are burning. But the stone is different, less hostile, more neutral. You place your palm against the wall. Still cold, yes, but not cruel. Down here, the heat of the day lingers longer. Maybe it's the proximity to the oven bricks. Maybe it's the tight spaces, packed with supplies and bodies. Or maybe it's just old architecture doing its best. You peek into a servant's sleeping corner. It's no more than a pile of cloaks, some folded hay, a bucket of lukewarm water. And yet, it looks almost inviting. One shape under the blanket, curled tight, arms wrapped around their knees. Another shape closer to the wall, pressed into a fur stolen from some forgotten feast. They're sleeping closer to life. And then there's the stable. You edge out into the courtyard, breath puffing like smoke. The stable door is ajar. Inside, the scent is thick. Damp hay, animal sweat, manure. You step in. Instantly, it's warmer. 3 cows, 2 goats, a sleepy old dog, and the gentle wheeze of stable boys curled up in the straw. They're bundled in cloaks, huddled together. One has his back to a goat's belly. Another uses a saddle as a pillow. It's not elegant, but it's effective. Animal body heat is the forgotten fuel of medieval warmth. Cows produce roughly 3,000 to 4,000 BTUs of heat per hour. When packed in a tight space, that adds up. The stables were often some of the warmest places in the entire castle. In fact, there are records of people faking stable duties just to steal a few hours of warmth. You crouch beside the wall, watching. No fire, no curtains, no furs. Just shared breath, shared proximity. The warmth here isn't artificial, it's biological. And the irony? It's more effective. Back upstairs, the noble lord may be tossing in a high-backed bed, curtains frozen stiff, fingers blue despite his feathered bolsters. But the stable boy? He's dreaming beside a snoring cow, probably the warmest soul in the entire stronghold. You smile, because this is the truth the castle never wanted you to see. Heat didn't follow hierarchy. It followed cleverness, location, timing, and community. You return slowly to the tower, each step reminding you of what you now know, that no matter how ornate the chamber, how thick the tapestry, or how high the title, cold climbed too. And sometimes, the warmest place to be was nowhere near the throne. The world is still asleep, but you're awake now. And not because of the cold, though that never really leaves. It's because of a sound. A steady thud, boots on stone, a rhythm carved into the dark. The watch has begun. Out beyond your curtained bed in the dying brazier, through the corridor and up along the battlements, men are patrolling the ramparts. Guards, sentinels, the unlucky few assigned to the most unforgiving job in the entire castle, staying awake, staying warm, and staying alive until sunrise. You shiver, not from the chill this time, but from the thought. You slip on a pair of boots and your cloak, already stiff with night air, and make your way upward. Each stair step feels colder, like you're ascending into the sky. Because in a sense, you are. The ramparts were designed to be exposed. They had to be. A lookout who couldn't see every direction wasn't useful. But that visibility came at a price. Total surrender to the elements. Historians still argue whether these guard posts rotated frequently, or whether certain men were simply expected to withstand hours in the cold, without relief. Castle records mention shifts, 2, sometimes 4 hours. But weather didn't care about protocol. Wind didn't check the schedule. You reach the top of the tower and push open the narrow iron door to the outer walkway. And instantly, it hits you. The wind, not a breeze, not a whisper, but a full-body shove. It cuts through your cloak like it's tissue. Your ears sting, your eyes water, and ahead, walking in slow loops with hunched shoulders and squinting eyes, is a watchman. No plate armor here, no shining knight under the stars, just a tired man in layered wool, a fur cap too small for his head, and a spear that looks more ceremonial than practical. He's stamping his feet, over and muttering to himself between breaths. Maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. You nod to him. He nods back, eyes hollow. His hands are tucked into his sleeves. His belt holds a flask, probably of spiced wine or ale. Not for intoxication, but to keep the blood moving. Alcohol didn't warm you. It tricked you into feeling warm, which, on nights like this, was close enough. You glance around. There's no fire here. Brazier might be set up in some castles, placed in corners of the parapet. But even then, lighting and maintaining one was risky. Wind could blow embers. Wood was scarce. And carrying hot coals up a spiral stairway. Ask your insurance provider. So instead, guards moved constantly, pacing, swinging arms, slapping thighs, doing little dances to stay conscious. Some chewed cloves or bitter herbs to stay alert. Others whispered psalms or hummed songs their mothers sang. Because here, at the edge of the world, sleep was the enemy. If you dozed off and missed something, an approaching torch, the shift of a shadow, the creak of a gate, the consequences weren't personal. They were collective. A sleeping guard wasn't just risking his own life. He was gambling the safety of the entire castle. You sit on the stone bench for a moment. Instantly, regret. The cold seeps through your bones as if the stone were drinking your body heat. You shoot back up, bouncing slightly, now understanding the endless motion of the watchman. Stillness isn't rest. Stillness is surrender. You pace with him now, side by side, not talking, just moving. The castle below is still, quiet except for the faint clink of chainmail or the snort of a horse in the courtyard stable. The sky is clear, stars scattered like frozen crumbs, and all around you, the wind whispers. But in this moment, something sacred is happening. This man, this half-frozen silhouette in wool, is the final thread holding the castle together tonight. Not the walls, not the gates, not the nobleman snoring 2 floors below. Him. He is the one who will see the sun rise or raise the alarm. He is the one who will stamp his feet until the morning fire is lit. He is the one who must not fall asleep. You glance down at your own fingers, number barely moving. You look at the guard again. He's done this for years. You? 15 minutes and your ears are about to resign. And that's when it sinks in. The warmest bed in the castle doesn't mean anything if the wall is breached. The guards aren't trying to sleep through the night. They're trying to outlast it, tooth by tooth, hour by hour, and many didn't. There are records, quiet ones, of guards freezing to death on post, found stiff in the morning, still upright. Others collapsed from exhaustion, punished for sleeping on duty even if their failure came from hunger, frost, or sheer human limitation. Because in the end, this wasn't about discipline. It was about sacrifice. The cold wasn't just a discomfort. It was a test, and it didn't care if you were brave, only if you endured. You descend from the ramparts slowly, the wind still nipping at your fingers despite the feeble shelter of your cloak. Behind you, the watchman continues his lonely march under the stars. Below, the rest of the castle sleeps, sort of. Because even now, even in the deepest part of the night, life still flickers in the quietest corners, and where the warmth has failed, people are clinging to their own strange rituals to make it through. You wander past a narrow corridor and catch sight of an old wooden bench with scorched metal slats beneath it. You know what this is? A warming stool. At first glance, it looks like something built for torture, or an especially enthusiastic knitting circle. But in fact, it was a medieval miracle of design. A warming stool was a wooden frame fitted with a metal tray underneath where hot coals were placed. People, often women during prayer or sewing, sat on these benches, their skirts draped down like a tent, trapping the rising heat underneath. Ingenious, cozy, and only occasionally responsible for setting a hemline ablaze. You touch the bench now. It's cold, of course, the coals long gone. But you imagine the ritual, embers spooned from a kitchen hearth, gently nestled into the tray, someone kneeling on the stool, fingers wrapped in wool, murmuring Latin under their breath, blessed by warmth and soot in equal measure. Historians still argue whether warming stools were household staples or symbols of privilege. They're mentioned often in noble inventories. Similar designs appear in rural homes too. Either way, they show one thing clearly. The cold was a shared enemy, and everyone got creative. You pass through the side hallway and into what must have once been a lady's chamber. The room is cramped, but hints of former elegance linger. A frayed tapestry, a rusting mirror, a wooden chest with cracked paint. And beside the bed, fur-lined boots. You lift one. It's stiff, rough-hewn, and lined with sheepskin. You run your fingers along the inside and feel the texture. Soft, but worn, like the coat of an old animal who's lived through too many winters. These boots never left the bedside. They weren't for walking through the snow or clomping around the halls. They were for slipping on in the middle of the night when the stone floor felt like it might bite off your toes. They were for fetching a log, or checking on a child, or stumbling to a chamber pot at 2 a.m. without screaming from frost shock. And there were other tools too. Leg wraps, long strips of wool wound tightly around the calves. Some were even lined with rabbit fur. In wealthier homes, servants heated these wraps near the fire before winding them onto noble legs, the medieval version of thermal leggings. Then there was the bedding itself. You stepped to the bed, noticing the layers. First, a linen sheet, then a woolen blanket, then another, then a fur throw, fox or marten, maybe. Tucked at the foot is something that feels like thick felt or boiled wool. And beneath it all, the mattress, still lumpy, still stiff, still better than the floor. You lie down again, just briefly, and wrap the blanket over your shoulders. And now you feel it again. The weight. Not just physical, emotional. This isn't just about staying warm. This is about fighting back. Layer by layer, the people of this castle tried to preserve a space against the world. Every wool wrap, every stone warmed by fire, every shared bed and bed curtain was a whispered defiance against the night. You think of the servant boy by the kitchen hearth, of the woman curled on the warming stool, of the guard on the wall, walking his slow circle, eyes half closed, breath like steam. None of them are truly sleeping. Not deeply, not safely, but they're surviving. And sometimes that's more powerful than rest. You close your eyes again, not to sleep, but to listen. The castle speaks, not in words, but in signs. The faint pop of a coal in the brazier, the hush of a blanket shifting down the hall, the cough of a child, the groan of wind outside the shutter, the snort of a cow in the stable, the crackle of old wood under weight. Life, happening anyway, despite the cold, despite the odds, despite the fact that this entire structure, majestic, formidable, legendary, is at its core a stone box trying very hard not to kill you while you rest. And somehow, that makes every flicker of warmth more sacred. Dawn isn't here yet, but you feel it pressing softly against the castle walls, like the breath before a word, like the pause before the sun remembers to rise. You're still wrapped in layers of wool and felt, your breath curling gently inside the bed curtain world you carved out hours ago. And though you haven't moved, you can sense the night retreating. Just a little. But not everyone gets to feel that shift, because not everyone wakes up. In medieval castles, the battle against cold didn't end with sleep. Sometimes, it didn't even end with morning. Winter deaths were common, quiet, undramatic. The cold didn't shout. It simply took. And more often than not, it took the ones least able to fight back. You sit up slowly, groggy and aching. Your fingers feel stiff. Your joints crack when you stretch. The blankets have slipped down one side of your bed, and a pocket of ice has crept in beneath your knees. You pull them up again, sealing off the breach. The damage is done. As the rest of the castle begins to stir in the lowest, earliest ways, doors creaking open, boots on stone, a faint cough down the hall, you begin to remember the stories, not the heroic ones, the ordinary tragedies. A servant found curled beneath a staircase, frozen overnight after being sent on a late errand and never making it back to her mat. A stable boy who fell asleep beside a drafty window, his hands so numb by morning they never worked properly again. An elderly noblewoman who caught a winter chill that never left her chest and was gone before the snow melted from the tower roof. Historians still argue whether castles were truly deadlier in winter than peasant cottages. Some say the walls offered more protection. Others believe the cold was actually worse inside thanks to thick stone trapping low temperatures, like a tomb. The truth likely sits in the middle. A well-built cottage could be warmed by one fire. A castle chamber needed 4, maybe 5, and servants to tend them. And even then, no guarantees. You slide your feet over the edge of the bed. The floor bites like metal. The first breath you take outside the curtain feels sharp, not freezing, but sobering. Your brazier is long gone now. Just ash and memory. No glow, no heat. The air smells like coal dust and wool. But at least there's air. Fresh enough. Breathable. Last night you left the curtain cracked slightly open, learning from the lesson of smoke. You're grateful now. It could have gone another way. You stand, slowly. Wrap yourself in your cloak. The wool feels like sandpaper today, but it's better than nothing. You make your way toward the door. The iron latch is cold against your palm, and when you open it, the hallway greets you with its usual chill. Neutral, impersonal, quietly inhospitable. A maid walks past you in silence. She's holding a pair of metal pots and a folded fur. No eye contact, just duty. She's likely heading to another chamber to reheat a noble's sleeping stones or check on a fevered child. She looks exhausted. You follow her path for a while, your boots echoing through the narrow corridor. At each chamber you pass, you imagine the state inside. Some beds empty, some curled tight, some already up and shuffling. And in some, perhaps nothing stirs at all. Because sometimes warmth simply doesn't return. It isn't always dramatic. There's no sudden scream, no burst of drama, just silence. Someone didn't stir. Someone didn't cough. Someone didn't whisper for water. And when the sun rose, they were still. You pause near a servant's dormitory, barely more than a large alcove closed off with a tattered curtain. 4 figures huddle on the floor, wrapped in cloaks, blankets, and each other. One girl stirs, glances at you, then turns away. She's alive, but her skin looks pale, her breath shallow. You wonder how many more nights her body can tolerate this. And then there are the nobles. Yes, even they died of cold. People like to imagine that wealth insulated you. But as you've already learned, cold didn't care about titles. Many noble rooms were placed high in the towers, far from the kitchens, close to the wind. Ornate, spacious, drafty, and impossible to heat. A room like that could become a trap, and their age didn't help. The elderly were especially vulnerable. A minor chill could trigger a persistent cough. A little stiffness in the joints could become full-blown immobility. And if servants weren't vigilant, if the brazier wasn't tended, if the fire went out, if the curtain was left open, that was all it took. A noble might pass peacefully in their sleep, surrounded by furs and bolsters. But peaceful doesn't mean painless. Their final hours were likely spent in stiffness and confusion, their lungs tightening, their hearts slowing. Cold doesn't always kill quickly. Sometimes it just convinces the body to stop trying. You descend the stairs, heading for the lower floors, where the air is marginally warmer. The kitchens are stirring. You smell ash, bread, wet wool. A fire's been started, early. Someone smart knew it was a rough night. You hover near it, rubbing your hands. The heat seeps in slowly, not deeply, but enough. A servant comes in carrying a pile of firewood. She's young, maybe 14. She's barefoot. You frown. She doesn't. Her face is blank with exhaustion. But she's breathing, and she's moving. And in a castle, that's a form of victory. You help her place the wood near the hearth. She nods, doesn't speak. Her lips are chapped, her fingers raw. Later today, someone will make a tally of who didn't report to morning duty. Someone will check the chambers that haven't yet stirred. In most cases, the occupant will simply be asleep, or sick, or slow to wake. But once in a while, the castle will be quieter by one more name. You head back to your chamber, slowly, feeling the difference the fire made in your core. It's not heat, not truly, but it's enough to face the room again, to relight the brazier, to fold the blankets, to prepare once more for the coming night. Because this isn't a story of one victory. It's a cycle. Night after night, people prepared, suffered, survived, or didn't. And those who remained carried the memory forward in quiet ways, reheating a stone more carefully, doubling a blanket, checking twice on the old man in the corner room, making space in a crowded bed for someone too thin to sleep alone. And that's how humanity made it through winter, year after year. Not through comfort, but through attention. The fire is out. No smoke, no glow, no embers pretending to still be useful. Just silence and ash. The brazier sits cold and inert in the corner of your chamber, looking less like a source of comfort and more like a monument to a long, sleepless night. You're standing by it now, staring down at what's left. Blackened cinders, dust, maybe a sliver of warmth if you press your hand close enough. But you don't. You already know what it would feel like. Nothing. This is the reality most castle dwellers woke to each morning. A room colder than memory, heavy with yesterday's smoke and shadow. The fires that once danced were now dead, and the only thing left to do was start the whole process over again. But there's no rushing it. Before there's warmth, there's resignation. You wrap your cloak tighter and glance out the narrow window. Light is creeping into the sky. The sun hasn't arrived yet, but it's trying. The stone around you glows a soft blue, like a bruise. And just for a moment, the room seems to hold its breath. And in that pause, you remember, the cold wasn't just the night's enemy. It was the day's first task. Surviving the night wasn't the end. It was just the start of a new battle. The battle of warming the space again before the cold undid the people inside it. You cross the room and open your chamber door. The hallway greets you with its usual indifference. The wind has died down outside, but it left its fingerprints everywhere. Under doors, behind tapestries, inside your joints. You walk slowly, boots scuffing the stone, listening. Down the corridor, a servant emerges from another room, arms full of folded blankets. Her eyes meet yours briefly, then drop. She doesn't speak. Neither do you. The shared understanding needs no words. Someone didn't sleep, or didn't make it. You move on, making your way toward the stairwell. The air shifts slightly as you descend. The lower you go, the more the castle begins to feel inhabited again. Human. You pass the kitchen hallway and smell smoke, but the good kind, fresh smoke. A hearth relit. You stop there at the doorway, watching. Two kitchen servants are crouched low near the base of the hearth, coaxing the fire back to life. One blows gently through a tube, embers sparking. The other feeds it kindling, inch by inch. No talking, just breathing, just focus. You step closer. The heat doesn't hit you yet, but the promise of it does. That orange flicker in the darkness, the rising wisp of warmth. It's enough to stir something inside you. not comfort, hope. Because here's the thing, fire in a medieval castle was never guaranteed. It wasn't just a matter of lighting a match. Wood was often wet. Coal was expensive. Braziers needed tending every hour, and embers had to be preserved carefully overnight. A successful fire in the morning wasn't just useful, it was miraculous. And once it caught, the work wasn't done. The fire had to be transferred, coals scooped into metal pans, carried quickly, carefully, to chambers above, laid into new braziers, fed again, protected from wind. You picture it now. Servants moving through the hallways like pilgrims with relics, their baskets glowing, their steps urgent. Every chamber waited, every bed, every bedstone, every pot of water counted on them. Historians still debate how organized these routines were. Some say noble households ran with military precision. Others claim it was chaos. Fires lit where needed, when needed, by whoever was awake and able. But in every case, one thing was constant. The fire mattered more than the furniture. And when it failed, you think of the stories again. Rooms that never warmed, illnesses that flared back up, fingers that turned black, relationships that broke down under the strain of too many nights spent curled away from each other, resentful of who got more blanket, more warmth, more breath. You turn from the fire and step back into the corridor. It's lighter now. A pale silver drapes over the stones. You return to your chamber, moving slower than before. And when you re-enter, the stillness is striking. No fire, no sound, just the ghost of what the room was at 2 a.m. and the weight of what it must become again by 6 p.m. You sit on the bed. The mattress crunches beneath you. The curtain, now pulled open, sways faintly. You reach down and touch the bedstone tucked under the furs. It's stone again now, not warm, not cold, just neutral, forgotten. It's done its job, and now it will start again. You pick it up, run your hand along the surface, smooth, heavy. You carry it to the hearth, place it inside the firebox, just in case someone brings coals later. It's what they did. What they always did. Prepare early. Trust nothing. Expect the cold to come back. And it will. You sit by the hearth for a moment longer, watching the room from this angle. From the floor, the bed looks like a fortress. The blanket mound like a battlefield just abandoned. The curtain rails like scaffolding. And in a way, it is a fortress. Just not the kind made of stone. It's the kind made of ritual. You begin again, folding the blanket, checking the brazier, shaking the felt pad, refastening the window latch that worked loose in the wind. You're not preparing for sleep. Not yet. But you're laying the foundation. Because in a medieval castle, every warm moment was borrowed, never earned, never promised. And if you didn't prepare the day before the freeze came, you were already too late. You step to the mirror. Your face is pale, red rings under your eyes, but you're breathing. Your limbs work. Your heart ticks on. And maybe that's enough, because as terrible as last night was, as cold, as dry, as fragile, it ended with you here, alive, awake, able to reach for fire again. The old ones called that a victory. And maybe they were right. You look down at your hands, still rough from the wind, still inked faintly from soot. You place them near the empty brazier again, not for warmth this time, but for memory, because the fire will come back, because you'll build it, because you always do. And when the night comes again, and it will, you'll be ready. Maybe not perfectly, Maybe not warmly, but ready. Because that's what people did in this place. They didn't live comfortably. They lived deliberately. The castle breathes, not in a romantic way, not with warmth or softness, but with movement, slow, deliberate, and entirely earned. After hours of stillness, you hear it. Boots on stone, firewood splitting, a bucket creaking as it's lowered into the well, a voice calling out orders in the kitchen courtyard, a door slamming somewhere overhead. The wind hasn't left, but it's stepped back, for now. You're standing by the narrow window of your chamber. The sky is no longer black, but gray-blue, like old linen. The air outside looks damp, as if the castle were exhaling frost through every crack in its skin. And despite everything, despite the night, despite the cold still lingering in your chest, you're here. You made it, and you're not alone. Servants pass in pairs now. Firewood in arms, iron pots hanging from poles, a boy dragging a wrapped bundle of warm stones on a small sled made of rope and wood. Everyone has something to do. Everyone's in motion. Because in a medieval castle, surviving the night didn't mean the work was over. It meant the day's battle had just begun. You descend the staircase slowly. Each stone step is slick with morning damp. But there's life here now. Somewhere below, a dog barks. A stable mutt, maybe, or a guard's companion. You smell cooked oats, boiled cabbage, wet wool, smoke. And then the sounds begin to multiply. A cough, a bucket tipping, the hiss of hot water splashed on cold stone, the low drone of someone chanting morning prayers in a side chapel, a blacksmith striking metal. The castle is no longer a tomb. It's a system. A living, humming, groaning machine made of people doing what they always do. At the heart of it all, the fire. You move toward the kitchen wing, drawn by the promise of warmth. The door stands open. Bless whoever left it that way. Inside, the hearth is glowing red, flames licking over new logs. Several people are gathered around it, not idling, but working, heating water, roasting chestnuts, drying boots. Someone is laying out warmed linens on a flat stone shelf. It's not cozy, but it's functional. And in a castle, that's as close as you get to comfort. You find a place near the hearth, crouching slightly. The stone beneath you is warm, just a little. You hold your hands out, feeling the slow thaw creep into your knuckles. You don't speak. No one here does. The fire is a sacred silence, and as the heat reaches your chest, you begin to feel it. Not just survival, but something more powerful. Continuity. You're not the first to crouch at this hearth, not the first to wake with numb hands and smoke-sore eyes, not the first to survive a night that bit at your ribs and left your lips cracked. This fire has fed generations, and you feel them here with you, not as ghosts, not as echoes, but as ancestors in the same fight. The ones who figured out how to trap warmth inside layers. The ones who knew to hang curtains around the bed. The ones who heated stones and wrapped bottles and slept curled like children, even when they were kings. Historians often talk about medieval grandeur, battles, borders, banquets. But the real legacy? It's this. The whisper of a fire rebuilt every morning after a night that could have ended you. You breathe deep. The smoke is softer now, the logs catching evenly. The boy beside you is warming a flat stone between two bricks. His hands are red, his eyes sleepy. He doesn't look at you, but you nod to him anyway, because this is the language here. You made it. I made it. Let's make it again, tonight. And the irony? The ones who slept closest to the fire, the lowest ranked servants, the kitchen boys, the scullions and stable hands, often fared better in winter than the lords above. You've seen it now, from the inside. The tower chambers were elegant but freezing. The noble beds were tall and curtained, perched in the path of wind and distant from any real heat. The higher you were, the colder you slept, and no title could warm your bones. Meanwhile, those who cooked, cleaned, chopped wood, hauled water, they slept near the ovens, the hearths, the kettles, cramped quarters, shared bedding, but proximity to fire. You smile a little. It feels fair somehow. Because the castle didn't reward power with comfort. It rewarded proximity. You glance at the doorway. Beyond it, the sky is growing brighter. A pale yellow haze beginning to rim the outer walls. Somewhere, a rooster crows. Not for you, not theatrically, just because it always does. You rise slowly, stepping away from the hearth. The heat clings to you for a few seconds, like a borrowed cloak, before beginning to fade. But you carry it with you anyway. You return to your chamber one last time. The bed still shows the evidence of the night. Blankets tossed, straw flattened, the curtain twisted. The brazier is ash. The bedstone is cold again. Somehow, it all feels different now. Not hostile, not sad, just honest. This is a place built for endurance, a machine of rituals, and every object, every ember, every fold of wool is part of a long tradition of not giving in. You begin to remake the bed, not because you expect a nap, but because tonight is coming. And when it does, you'll want everything ready. You fluff the mattress, shake out the blanket, fold it into 3, drape the curtain back into place, reset the brazier with kindling. There, ready for war again. You press your hand to the window shutter. It's cold, but you leave it cracked, just enough to let light in, just enough to remind yourself the sun always comes back. And now, finally, the castle hums with life. You hear boots in the upper corridor, a pail of water splashing in a tub, a goat bleating. A song hummed softly from the girl in the linen chamber, the rhythm of survival, the music of tradition. You stand at the center of it, and you realize something. This castle is not cold. It is inhabited by people who fight the cold every day, who light fires every morning, who wrap stones in cloth and place them at the feet of children, who sit on warming stools and share beds and hold each other close when the wind howls. People who don't expect comfort, but who still seek warmth and create it for themselves and for each other. Because in the end, that's what medieval life was. Not peaceful, not glamorous, but communal, intentional, layered with memory. And now you are part of it. Not a visitor, not a tourist, a survivor. Welcome to the rhythm of the castle. Welcome to the day after the cold. Now the castle is fully awake, and you're no longer a stranger to it. You've walked its freezing halls, slept on its straw-stuffed beds, felt the burn of stone on bare feet, listened to the wind push secrets through the shutters. You've breathed the same air as the people who lived and died by warmth, night after night, century after century. And as the sun slowly rises over the parapets, casting long gold shadows down the walls, you realize something profound. They made it. Not all of them, not every night, but generation after generation, through war and famine and frost. They adapted. They shared beds. They curled up by cows. They lit fires that smoked and burned and sometimes betrayed them. They stitched layers of wool into the kind of armor no knight would wear, but every grandmother insisted on. And they passed it on. Not in books, but in habits, in folded blankets, in bedtime routines whispered before sleep, in the touch of warm stones pressed beneath the sheets by tired hands who'd done it 1,000 times before. Because surviving wasn't just physical, it was relational, it was cultural, it was shared. And as you lie back now, wrapped in the soft echo of the story, you let the memory of the cold fade, slowly, like smoke from the last ember curling into morning air. Picture the watchman stepping down from the tower, the kitchen boy blowing on his fingers, the servant girl folding the last fur at the foot of the bed. You picture the noblewoman, half awake, breathing into the warmth of the bedstone, her chamber still and silent, but not lonely. And you picture yourself, not as a guest, not as a tourist, but as one of them. You endured, you understood, and now you rest. So take a breath. Let it be long, let it be soft. Let your body, stiff and curled and layered in imagined wool, stretch gently into the space around you. The castle is no longer a mystery. It's a memory. And you? You're part of it now. Good night, keeper of the fire. Good night, watcher of the wall. Good night, sharer of the blanket. You made it, and you always will.